I am a 38-year-old male and was for almost 9 years married to my wife, Joni. I work for a large national bank in one of their Atlanta banks as a loan officer. I also have a substantial investment income as well. Joni and I live comfortably on my income. Joie is almost 7 years younger than I am. At this point in our marriage, she was doing some volunteer work. However, Joie always had my dinner on the table and was at home ready to greet me with a smile. We tried for almost 2 years to have a child, but we later learned I was not able to be a father. We started to research the process of artificial insemination, and I was excited about having a child several days before we were going to leave to go to the clinic. I found Joie in our bedroom crying. I tried to comfort her, but she continued to cry. I left her asleep a while later and walked outside to check the mail and decided to drive into the office and get some paperwork done. When I got home, Joie was not there. No food, no note, nothing. I thought maybe she just took a drive and forgot about the time. So I called and had a pizza delivered by 9 p.m. I was concerned and started calling her friends and family. Nobody had heard anything from her. I tried to sleep that night but was unable to. The next morning I called my job and asked for a day off. I had already decided to go file a missing person report. When at about 11 a.m. Joni came home. I am not a hothead. I just asked for an explanation but was ignored as she walked into the bedroom and got into the shower. Joie simply was refusing to discuss the situation. And when I tried to get her to talk, I got it. "You don't owe me" reply. We did not take that trip to the fertility clinic. And for the next 2 weeks, I was living in a state of shock at how Joie had changed. I found that my job helped clear my mind. I was getting close to the end of my rope. By the end of that second week, I had made up my mind to go stay with my brother and just avoid Joie, my brother, and I talked for several hours and he gave me the name and phone number of a great private investigator that worked in the Atlanta area. So I contacted this private investigator, paid him his fee and went back home. When I got there, Joie was cold and indifferent. I remember thinking, who is this stranger? Joie took over the master bedroom. So I slept in one of our other bedrooms. Then by chance I got a phone call from a doctor's office asking to speak to Joni. I said I was her husband and could deliver the message. All they said was have her call him? I hit red and learned that the call came from an OB/GYN clinic. I sat down and wrote a note for Joni to call the doctor's office. Then grabbed a beer and went to sit out on my patio wondering what the heck was going on. Fast forward. And it is almost a month later, Joni had asked me to come back to the master bedroom. But honestly, I stayed where I was. Then one day at work, the private investigator called me. He said we needed to meet. I asked, was it good or bad? He said it's bad. Very bad. We met about 2 hours later and he laid the entire thing out for me. Joie was sleeping with one of the local high school football coaches. He had video of them kissing in her head in his lap. Then I started to see what was happening. Joni was pregnant and her AP must have been the father. The private investigator said he needed to stay on the job for a bit longer because he wanted to follow the man some more to make sure he was not sleeping with another woman, and he told me to get tested as soon as possible. He was not charging me anymore. By this time, I was no longer angry. What I felt was more like relief. Georgia is a state where you can use adultery as grounds for the divorce. I had Joni dead to rights. I made an appointment with my attorney and he gave me a referral to one of the best divorce attorneys in Atlanta. I made an appointment and gave him all the videos and photos. He just smiled and asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I was done. I guess my inability to father a child might have driven her into another man's arms. The attorney stood up and said this was not my fault. He said the paperwork will be ready to file within a week. I paid him and left. By this time, the private investigator had identified Joni as a PS wife. She was a nurse at a local doctor's office. I took all my videos and photos and had them in an envelope. I walked into the clinic and asked for the wife when she came out. I noticed she looked older than I was and did not look good. I asked her if she had about 10 minutes to talk. It was almost as she was expecting me. She invited me back to a small break room and we talked for a few minutes. The videos were on DVDs, but I had enough photos to show her the truth. She said that this was the end of her marriage and I said it was the end of mine also. I called my attorney and he said he could handle both cases. We both agreed to hold off confrontations until all the divorces were served. What was funny was we were the primary earners in the marriages. She made almost double what he made and Joie did not have a job. So I went to work on the day. The papers were due to be served. All the process server told me was he expected to serve her around 2 p.m. About 20 minutes after 2, I got a call from Joie crying. "How could you do this?" I hummed up. I also was told by my attorney under no circumstances to move out of the home. By the time I got home, Joni had left. I got a call from the APS wife. He had also been served that day and was upset. Joie was from Asheville, North Carolina and was on her way there. The next day I packed all her things and boxed them in my garage. By this time, I had taken steps to disable all of Joni's plastic and remove her ability to get cash out of an ATM. I had Joni on 2 divorce grounds under Georgia law. She had been impregnated by her AP and she had committed adultery. The APS wife Carol and I would talk some along the way. Her husband was fighting her on everything. She was fighting depression. And to be honest, by this time, so was I. Then one day Joie came back and tried to get in the house. She had discovered I had changed the locks and disabled the garage door opener. She called me demanding to be let inside. I called my attorney and he called the sheriff's office and they got there a few minutes after I did. Then my attorney also arrived and told the deputies who he was and that Joie had abandoned the marital home. She broke down crying and really started to sob. I told her I would pay for a rental truck to load her things in, but she was not living in my home anymore. By this time, Carol had made her husband leave their home. Joni told me she was not interested in my help and would get her things. Shot me. The bird got in her car and left. She did hire an attorney who scheduled a meeting to discuss the divorce. He first wanted to know about marriage counseling and possible reconciliation. I shot that down. Then finally I learned where Joni had gone that day. She had driven almost 200 miles away to get an abortion. The more she talked the sicker. I got the attorney made an offer of an uncontested divorce if I gave her the house and half of my investments and kept her on my health insurance. My attorney simply said, "We will see you in court." I called Carol a few days later and she said her husband finally gave up and basically gave up all claims to everything but his clothes, most of the electronics in the house and both his car and Honda motorcycle. I later learned he quit working for that school system and got a job teaching in South Georgia. I had 2 meetings with my attorney and he told me getting the house will be tough. Joie has no job and most judges won't put them out on the streets. Otherwise he felt good that I would walk away with no support and all my investments intact. When the day of our hearing came, I guess somebody was looking after me because I saw Carol in the courtroom. My attorney laid out my case and took a few minutes showing the judge the video and photos. The private investigator was there to testify. He took them. Here is where things got a bit weird. Joni told the judge I was physically and mentally abusive. I knew this was BS. But it concerned my attorney enough that he asked for a continuance and the judge granted it. While my attorney was speaking to Joni's attorney, I spoke to Carol. I asked her if she was still talking to her ex. He was still in the Atlanta area. She said she had a phone number. Something inside me was telling me to speak to Joni's AP. It was almost like I was being driven to do it. I called him and we spoke for a moment and he surprised me by agreeing to go have a short chat. The first thing he said was, "I am ashamed of what I did. My actions destroyed 2 homes." I asked him if Johnny had ever said anything to him about me being abusive. He looked at me with a surprised look, then said, "Joie had said many times that I did not do anything to deserve being cheated on like that. And that one day she will have to go to confession." I asked him if he would be willing to testify to those conversations. He said it was the least he could do so. The day comes for our final hearing. My attorney told him to stay out in the hallway, and he advised her attorney. He had a rebuttal witness. A funny thing happened. Joni decided to drop everything and leave. The judge said, "Not so fast. You made some serious allegations against your husband. And as a judge, I have an obligation to hear them out." There was some back and forth between the judge, the attorney and Joni. The short of it was Joni admitted to committing perjury when it was done. The judge called the recess for an hour and said he would return with his findings when he came back. He asked Joni's attorney to explain to him why he should not hold her in contempt for perjury. The attorney got Joni to stand up to apologize. But the judge pointed to me and said, "He is the one you should apologize to." The judge asked me if Joni's car was paid off. I said, yes, it was. He didn't ask me if Johnny had any revolving credit balances. I said, "Not any that I know of." Then the judge took off his glasses and leaned back for a moment. He looked at me and said he was granting all my requests. I got the house and I was able to keep my investments. I was also authorized to remove Joie from my health insurance on the day my divorce was final. Then he looked at Joie and told her to get her butt out of his courtroom. Sadly, this was not the end of my story with Joie. She moved back to Asheville and after a trip to Charlotte was driving drunk and crashed her car. The North Carolina Highway Patrol estimated she was traveling at almost 100 miles per hour when her car left the highway. I am not a religious man. If there is any truth to the Catholic Church's teachings, I honestly hope Joni did get to that confession. This accident happened almost a week after our divorce was final. I did not have to pay for anything involved. Joie left all our wedding photos at the house today. My divorce was final. I burned them all. I will never get married again. One Joie in my life is one too many. Well, in my opinion, it goes to show you cheating doesn't pay. And sometimes you might get lucky with the state that you live in. Even if you are married for decades. If your spouse cheats, he or she may lose out on a bunch of financial perks. It's sad to call it perks. But if you think about it, that's exactly what it is.